A teenage girl jumped off a bus miles from home. Then a Hell's Angel saw. Why, the school bell rang at 3:15, and Emily Carter was already moving. She had her backpack on before most kids even stood up. She said quick goodbyes to her friends in the hallway, cut through the side door near the gym, and made her way down the cracked sidewalk toward the bus stop at the edge of Ridgeline High's parking lot. The afternoon sun was low and pale, and a cold breeze moved through the bare oak trees along the road. She pulled her jacket tighter and checked her phone. No messages. The number 9 bus was already idling when she got there. Its doors were open. She climbed the steps, showed her pass to the driver, a quiet older woman named Pat who always smelled like peppermint, and started down the aisle. That is when she saw him. Same seat. 3rd row from the back, on the right side. Window seat. He was a middle-aged man, somewhere in his 40s maybe, with plain brown hair that was starting to thin at the top. He wore a gray jacket and dark pants. Nothing about his clothes stood out. Nothing about his face stood out. He looked like the kind of person you would pass in a grocery store and forget about 2 seconds later. Before you continue listening, please let me know where in the world are you watching from today. Now back to the story. But Emily did not forget about him. She had seen him on this bus 7 times now. Maybe 8. She had started keeping count about 3 weeks ago when she first noticed the pattern. He never got on at the school stop. He was always already there when she boarded, always in that same seat, always looking out the window as if he had not noticed her at all. Except that he had. She could feel it every single time. She chose a seat towards the front, close to Pat, and set her backpack in her lap. She took out her phone and stared at the screen without really seeing it. A few other students climbed on behind her. Some freshman boys in the back row started laughing loudly about something. A girl named Maya slid into the seat across the aisle and put her earbuds in. Emily counted the stops quietly in her head. At the first stop, 2 kids from the middle school got off. At the second, 3 more. By the 4th stop, the bus had thinned out enough that Emily could feel the space around her getting bigger and quieter. She kept her eyes forward, but every few minutes she let her gaze drift toward the wide rear-view mirror above Pat's head. He was still there. He was not looking at his phone. He was not reading anything. He just sat with his hands in his lap, very still, and every now and then his eyes moved. She caught it once in the mirror. Just a flicker. His gaze sliding toward the front of the bus, and then away again. Quick and casual, like it meant nothing. It did not feel like nothing. Emily pressed her lips together and looked back down at her phone. She thought about saying something to Pat. She almost did, once about 2 weeks ago. She had stood up from her seat with her heart beating fast and walked halfway to the front of the bus before she talked herself back down. What would she even say? That a man she did not know kept riding the same bus as her? That he sat in the same seat? That he sometimes glanced toward the front? That was not a crime. That was not even unusual. Lots of people took the same bus every day. She probably looked at people without thinking about it too. She would sound paranoid. She would sound like a little kid. She sat back down and did not say a word. When her stop finally came, she got off quickly, and she did not look back. The walk home was only 4 blocks, but she walked fast the whole way. Dinner that night was soup and toast. Sarah Carter came through the front door at 6:30 still wearing her work lanyard, her dark hair pulled back in a messy knot, her eyes carrying that familiar heaviness that showed up every Monday. She worked long shifts at the medical billing office across town, and Mondays were always the worst. "Hey, baby," Sarah said, dropping her keys on the counter. "Smells good." I heated up the soup from yesterday, Emily said. Sit down, I'll get it. Sarah did not argue. She sank into her chair at the small kitchen table and rubbed the back of her neck with one hand. Emily ladled soup into 2 bowls, put the toast on a plate between them, and sat down across from her mother. They talked about small things. A quiz Emily had done well on. A co-worker of Sarah's who had said something funny during a meeting. The leaky faucet in the bathroom that they kept forgetting to call about. Emily opened her mouth twice. The first time she got as far as drawing a small breath. She was going to say, "Mom, there's this man on my bus." But Sarah was rubbing her temple with 2 fingers and staring at her soup bowl, and the words just stayed stuck somewhere in Emily's throat. The second time, she thought she might actually do it. She picked up her toast and then set it back down and looked at her mother's face, the dark circles under Sarah's eyes, the tired slope of her shoulders. The way she was holding her spoon like even that small weight was almost too much. Emily looked back at her bowl. She told herself it was probably nothing. She told herself she was overthinking it. She told herself that one tired Monday night was not the right time to pile something else onto her mother's plate, especially something she could not even fully explain. So she said nothing. After dinner, she washed the bowls, kissed her mother on the cheek, and went upstairs to her room. She sat on the edge of her bed for a long moment, staring at the floor. Maybe she was imagining things. She told herself that as she turned off the light. She told herself that again as she pulled the blanket up to her chin. But the image stayed with her anyway, quiet and stubborn in the dark. A man in a gray jacket, a window seat, eyes that moved just a little too quickly. She lay there a long time before sleep finally came. Emily woke up before her alarm. The room was still gray and dim, and the house was quiet. She lay on her back staring at the ceiling, already tired even though she had just opened her eyes. Sleep had come in small, broken pieces the night before, and each time she had drifted off, she had snapped awake again a few minutes later, with that same unsettled feeling sitting heavy on her chest. She got up, got dressed, and ate a bowl of cereal alone at the kitchen table. Sarah had already left for an early shift. The house felt very still. School did not help. In first period English, Mrs. Dawson wrote discussion questions on the board and asked the class to talk about the main character's choices in the chapter they had read over the weekend. Emily had done the reading. She knew the answers. But every time she tried to form a thought, it slipped away before she could hold on to it, replaced by the same looping image she could not seem to shake. A gray jacket, a window seat, eyes flicking toward the mirror. Emily? Mrs. Dawson was looking at her. Emily blinked. Sorry, can you repeat the question? A few kids glanced over. Nothing mean, just curious. But Emily felt her face go warm anyway. By lunch, she had replayed every bus ride she could remember over the past few weeks. She sat at a corner table with her friend Becca, who was talking about a show she had been watching, and Emily nodded and smiled at the right moments. But inside her head she was counting. 8 times. Maybe 9 now. Always the same seat. Always already there when she got on. Always gone by the time she reached her stop, stepping off at some point in the middle of the route without her ever noticing exactly when. You okay? Becca asked, tilting her head. Yeah, Emily said, just tired. Becca accepted that easily and kept talking. Emily poked at her food. She thought about looking up whether any of what she had noticed could be considered something official, something reportable. But what would she type? She could not exactly search for man who sits on the same bus and looks out the window. It sounded ridiculous even in her own head. By the time the final bell rang, She had convinced herself 3 separate times that she was overreacting, and 3 separate times something in her gut had quietly pushed back. She boarded the number 9 with her backpack clutched in both hands. He was there. Same seat, same gray jacket, same stillness. Emily sat near the front and fixed her eyes on her phone screen. The bus pulled away from the school. Students got off stop by stop. The noise in the back rows faded. The seats emptied. She was not looking at him. She was very careful not to look at him. But the window beside her seat caught the reflection of the whole bus behind her, a long, pale mirror of glass and gray afternoon light. And in that reflection, after the bus thinned out and the rows behind her went mostly quiet, she saw it clearly. He was watching her, not in a dramatic way, not staring openly. It was the same subtle thing she had noticed before, that same careful flicker. But this time she saw it happen twice in the space of a few minutes, his gaze lifting from his lap and settling on the back of her head, steady for just a moment before dropping away again. Her stop came and she stood up fast. She stepped off the bus without looking back, hit the sidewalk, and walked. Then she walked faster. By the last block she was nearly running. She got inside, shut the front door, and turned the deadbolt with both hands. She stood in the hallway with her back against the door and her heart going hard in her chest. She breathed. The house was quiet and safe and familiar all around her, but her hands were still shaking. She looked down at them like they belonged to someone else. She could not pretend anymore. Whatever this was, it was real. And it was getting harder to carry alone. That evening, Emily sat cross-legged on her bed with her laptop open. She had told herself she was just going to do a quick search. Nothing serious, just to see if her feelings made any sense. She typed slowly at first. What to do if someone keeps following you? Then she deleted it and tried again. Man on bus keeps watching me. She deleted that too. It felt too dramatic, like she was writing a headline for a story that had not actually happened yet. She settled on something simpler. Is it normal to feel watched by a stranger? The results came back fast. She read for a long time. There were forum posts and news articles and personal stories shared by girls who had felt exactly the way she was feeling. Some of them had written things like, I thought I was imagining it, and I kept telling myself I was being paranoid. Some of them had waited weeks before saying anything. Some had waited longer than that. A few of those stories did not end well. Emily pulled her knees up to her chest and kept reading. One girl had written that the hardest part was not the fear itself. It was the way the fear felt unreasonable when she tried to put it into words. She said that nothing had technically happened. That was the part that made her feel like she could not speak up, like she needed to wait for something real to occur before she had permission to be scared. Emily read that part twice. Her chest felt tight. She thought about the way his eyes had moved in the window's reflection, the way he was always already there when she got on, the way nothing had technically happened, the way she had locked her own front door with shaking hands. She closed the laptop and sat in the dark for a while. She would tell her mom. Soon. She just needed to find the right moment, the right words. A moment when Sarah was not rushing out the door or coming home half asleep on her feet. She lay back on her pillow and made herself a quiet promise. Soon. Wednesday moved slowly. Emily paid attention in class, but her mind kept drifting to the afternoon. She told herself that maybe he would not be there. She told herself she had options. She could sit somewhere different, closer to the driver, near other students who stayed on longer. She could make herself harder to watch. By the time the final bell rang, she had a plan. She boarded the number 9 and walked straight to the middle of the bus, sliding into a seat next to a girl from her school named Jasmine, who always rode to the second-to-last stop on the route. It felt smart, deliberate, safe. She pulled out her phone and told herself to relax. 3 stops later, she glanced up. He was there. He had moved. He was not in his usual window seat near the back. He was sitting 2 rows behind her now, on the opposite side of the aisle, close enough that she could hear the faint rustle of his jacket when he shifted. He was not looking at her directly. He never did. He was looking out the window at the passing road, his hands folded in his lap, perfectly still, perfectly ordinary. But he had moved. He had been in the back when she boarded. She was certain of it. The rest of the ride felt like it lasted an hour. She stared at her phone screen without seeing a single word on it. Jasmine got off 2 stops before hers, and the seat beside her went empty, and the bus got quieter, and she counted every second until the driver called her stop. She stepped off into the gray afternoon air and walked home without once looking behind her. Inside, she set her bag down on the kitchen floor, sat at the table, and put her face in her hands. She was going to tell her mother tonight. Not soon. Not when the moment was right. Tonight. The kitchen smelled like tomato soup and dish soap. Sarah stood at the counter sorting through a stack of envelopes, still wearing her work uniform. Her name tag was crooked. There were tired lines around her eyes that had not been there a year ago. Emily sat at the kitchen table watching her mom move from the envelopes to the calendar on the wall, then to her phone, then back to the envelopes again. "Can you grab the scissors from that drawer?" Sarah asked without looking up. "I need to clip this coupon before I forget." Emily got up and found the scissors and set them on the counter. "Thanks, baby." Sarah kissed the top of her head as she passed. Emily sat back down. She opened her mouth. She closed it again. Sarah had already moved on. She was on the phone now, wedging it between her shoulder and her ear while she flipped through the calendar with one hand and stirred the soup with the other. "Thursday I can do," Sarah was saying. "But Friday is a no-go. I've got the double shift." She laughed at something the person said. It was a short laugh, the kind that meant she was tired but trying. Emily traced a scratch in the kitchen table with her finger. She thought about how to start. She rehearsed it in her head. "Mom, there is this man on the bus. He keeps showing up. He moves his seat. It sounds strange, I know it does, but something feels wrong." She said none of it. Sarah hung up and dropped her phone on the counter. She pressed both palms flat against the edge of the sink and looked out the dark kitchen window for a moment. Just a breath. Just a few seconds of stillness before she turned back around and reached for the pot. "Soup is almost ready," she said. "How was school?" "Fine," Emily said. "Tests this week?" "One tomorrow, history." "You study?" "Yeah." Sarah carried 2 bowls to the table and sat down across from her daughter. She blew on a spoonful of soup and looked at Emily with warm, searching eyes. For a second, Emily thought she was going to ask. Like maybe her mom already sensed something without being told. "You look tired," Sarah said softly. "I'm okay," Emily said. Sarah nodded and looked down at her bowl. Emily picked up her spoon. Thursday was ordinary in every way that felt dishonest. School passed. The bus ride home was tense and quiet, and he was there again, settled in like something permanent. Emily got off at her stop and walked home fast with her hood up. That evening, Sarah was in a good mood. She made grilled cheese sandwiches, and they watched a show together on the couch. And Emily laughed at the right moments and nodded when her mom talked about a co-worker who had done something funny at the register. It felt almost normal, It felt almost like the right time. But then Sarah looked at the clock and made a sound under her breath and stood up quickly. "They called me in for a late shift tonight," she said, already moving toward the bedroom. "Marilyn called out sick again. 3rd time this month." She reappeared, pulling her hair back. "There is leftover soup in the fridge. Lock up after I leave, okay? Do not wait up." Emily stood by the couch. "Okay." Sarah grabbed her keys and her bag. She cupped Emily's face in both hands for just a moment. "You are sure you are okay?" "I am sure," Emily said. Sarah kissed her forehead and was gone. Emily stood in the quiet living room and listened to the sound of the car backing out of the driveway. She listened until the engine faded and the street went still. She looked at the locked front door. She would explain everything after the weekend. Saturday morning, when they both had time, when the kitchen was unhurried and the day had nowhere urgent to go. Saturday, she told herself. She turned off the TV and went to bed. The school hallways were almost empty by the time Emily packed up her things. The academic bowl practice had run long. Mrs. Tillman always let the clock slip when they were in the middle of a good round, and tonight had been a good round. Emily had answered 7 questions correctly. Under normal circumstances, she would have felt proud of that. Tonight, she just felt late. She pushed through the heavy side door and stepped outside. The cold hit her right away. The sky had already gone dark, the kind of deep blue-gray that meant full night was close. The parking lot lights buzzed overhead and cast long yellow shapes across the pavement. Emily pulled her jacket tighter and walked toward the bus stop at the edge of the school grounds. She was the only one waiting. The bus arrived 4 minutes later, its headlights swinging around the corner. The doors folded open with a hiss, and Emily stepped up and scanned her card. She looked down the aisle. He was already there, not near the front, not in the middle, near the rear, on the left side, in the seat he always seemed to find his way back to. He was wearing the same dark jacket, the same plain clothes that made him look like nobody at all. His hands were folded in his lap, and he was looking out the window. Emily stood in the aisle for 1 second too long. Then she walked forward and chose a seat near the middle of the bus, on the opposite side. She pressed herself close to the window and set her backpack on her lap like a small shield. There were maybe 8 other passengers. An older woman with grocery bags. 2 high school boys from a different school, laughing about something on one of their phones. A heavy-set man in work boots who was already half asleep with his chin tipped toward his chest. Normal people going home after a normal day. Emily stared out her window and watched the school disappear behind them. The first stop came 10 minutes into the ride. The 2 laughing boys got off, still looking at the phone as they stepped onto the curb. The doors closed. The bus rolled on. Then the older woman with the grocery bags. Then a man Emily had not noticed sitting near the front. The bus grew quieter with each stop. The roads grew darker. Out here, past the edge of town, there were no streetlights, just flat fields on both sides, and the occasional farmhouse set far back from the road with a single light burning in a window. Trees crowded the shoulders in long, unbroken stretches. Emily shifted in her seat. She did not look back directly. She had learned not to do that. Instead, she watched the dark window across the aisle, using it like a mirror. The angle was not perfect, but it was enough. He had moved. Not dramatically. Not in a way that anyone else would notice. He was now 2 rows closer than he had been when she boarded. His head was angled slightly in her direction, not staring outright, but tilted just enough. Like he was keeping track. Emily's stomach tightened. She breathed slowly and deliberately and told herself to stay calm. The man in the work boots got off at the next stop. He lumbered down the steps without looking at anyone. Now there were 4 passengers left. Emily, the man, 2 others near the front who seemed absorbed in their own quiet worlds. She pulled out her phone. Her fingers were not quite steady. She typed a message to her mom. "Hey, on the bus, just wanted to say hi." She stared at the screen. She added one more line. "Hope your shift is going okay." She sent it and held the phone in both hands and watched the little icon that showed the message had been delivered. The bus swayed gently around a long curve in the road. Outside the window, the field stretched out black and empty in every direction. Emily kept her eyes on the phone and waited for her mother to write back. Sarah Carter was on her feet for the 3rd straight hour. The diner was short-staffed again. It always seemed to be short-staffed on Friday nights, when the booths filled up fast and the kitchen got backed up, and the manager kept saying, "Just push through, just push through," like that was somehow helpful. Sarah pushed through. She moved from table to table with a practiced smile and a coffee pot that never seemed to stay full. Her feet ached. Her lower back had been sending little warnings since around 9 o'clock. She ignored them both. Her phone was in her apron pocket. It buzzed once around 9:15, but she was in the middle of taking a large order, and she didn't get a chance to look at it. Then the kitchen called out 2 plates, and she forgot about it entirely. She would check it on her break. Her break kept getting pushed back. On the bus, Emily watched the last 2 passengers get off at the same stop. A woman in a puffy coat. A teenager about Emily's age with earbuds in, who never once looked up from his phone as he stepped off the curb. The doors closed. Now it was just her. And him. Emily stared straight ahead. Her heart was beating hard and fast, the way it did before a test she wasn't ready for, except this was worse. Much worse. This feeling had teeth. She looked down at her phone. The message to her mother still showed as delivered, not read. The little check mark just sat there, quiet and useless. She typed again. "Mom, can you call me?" She waited 10 seconds. 20. Nothing. The bus driver was a heavy-set man named Phil, who she had seen dozens of times over the past year. He had a kind face and usually nodded at her when she boarded. But right now, Phil was just a silhouette behind a thick plastic partition, eyes on the dark road, separated from everything happening behind him. Emily gripped the metal bar on the seat in front of her. She could feel it without looking. The shift in the air. The quiet that felt less like peace and more like pressure building. She risked a glance in the dark window. He had moved again. He was close now. 2 rows back, directly behind her and 1 seat to the right. She hadn't heard him move. She never did. He was careful that way. Patient, like someone who had done this before and knew exactly how to stay just inside the line of normal. His hands were resting on the back of the seat in front of him. He was looking at the back of her head. Emily looked down at her lap. Her phone screen had gone dark. She pressed the button to light it up and stared at her mother's name in the message thread. Please, she thought. Please just look at your phone. Outside, a green highway sign flashed past in the headlights. She read it without meaning to. County Road 7. Rural route stop. 1 mile. She had never gotten off at that stop in her life. It was miles from her house. There was nothing out there but dark fields and gravel shoulders, and a few scattered lights from farms set way back off the road. But her body was already making the decision before her mind caught up. The bus began to slow. Emily stood up. Her legs felt strange. Stiff and shaky at the same time. She grabbed her backpack by one strap and walked quickly to the front of the bus, keeping her eyes forward. Phil opened the doors without a word. He probably assumed she knew where she was going. Emily stepped down onto the gravel. The cold air hit her face. The doors hissed shut behind her. She took 3 steps forward and then turned around. Through the smudged glass of the bus window, she saw him stand up. He rose slowly from his seat and turned toward the exit. He was moving. Emily spun around and walked fast into the darkness, her sneakers crunching on the gravel, her breath coming out in short white clouds, the empty black road stretching out ahead of her with no lights and no sound and no one in sight. The gas station sat at the edge of nothing. One pump, a buzzing yellow light above the door. A hand-painted sign in the window that said "Open," but looked like it hadn't been updated in years. The kind of place you stopped at because you had to, not because you wanted to. Wade Mercer squeezed the pump handle and watched the numbers roll. His motorcycle sat beside him, ticking softly as the engine cooled. It was a big machine. Black and chrome, with a worn leather seat, and a Hells Angels patch on the saddlebag that had faded just enough to show how many miles it had been carried. He had ridden nearly 4 hours that day. A charity run for veterans up in Clover County. 40 bikes, a lot of noise, and a check handed to a family who needed it. Good day. Tired bones. He was ready to get home. The pump clicked off. He replaced the nozzle and screwed the cap back on the tank. He stretched his back, slow and deliberate, and reached into his jacket pocket for a piece of gum. That was when he saw her. She came out of the dark like a shadow that had broken loose from something. Moving fast, too fast for a casual walk, but not quite running, a backpack hanging off one shoulder. Head turned back every few steps, checking behind her. Wade went still. He had seen that kind of movement before. It wasn't the walk of someone who was lost. Lost people slow down, look around, try to get their bearings. This girl wasn't lost. She was scared. He watched her for a moment without moving. 15, maybe 16. Dark hair pulled back. Jeans and a school hoodie. Not dressed for a night out in the middle of nowhere. She hadn't spotted him yet. He didn't get on his bike. He didn't call out. He just started walking slowly in her direction, keeping himself visible under the gas station light, making sure he wasn't sneaking up on anyone. When she finally noticed him, she stopped dead. The look on her face nearly broke him in half. Pure terror. Her eyes went wide and she took a step back, and for a second he thought she might bolt into the dark field beside the road. He stopped walking, held both hands up, loose and open. "Hey." His voice was low and steady. "I'm not going to hurt you. I'm just getting gas." She didn't move. He didn't either. "You okay?" he asked. She shook her head, a small, tight movement. Then she looked back down the road again. Wade followed her gaze. The road was empty, dark fields on both sides. No one coming. He took one slow step to the side, putting the gas pump between himself and her, giving her more space. "You don't have to talk to me," he said, "but I'm not leaving you out here alone." She looked at him again. Really looked at him this time. He knew what she was seeing. The size of him, the beard, the tattoos crawling up his neck, the leather vest with its patches. He had seen that look 1,000 times in his life. He never blamed anyone for it, he just waited. Something shifted in her face. Not trust, exactly. More like exhaustion winning out over fear. "There was a man," she said. Her voice was barely above a whisper. "On the bus. He keeps showing up. For weeks." Her breath caught. "He got up when I got off." Wade kept his expression calm, even though everything inside him had just gone tight. "Is he still on the bus?" "I don't know." She glanced back again. "I don't know where he went." Okay, Wade said. Call your mom. Right now. Tell her where you are. Her hands were shaking as she pulled out her phone. Sarah answered on the second ring. Emily? Her voice cracked straight through the speaker. Mom. Emily pressed the phone to her ear, and her whole body seemed to sag with relief. Mom, I need you to come get me. I'm already moving, Sarah said. Tell me exactly where you are, Emily told her. I'm on my way, Sarah said. Don't you hang up. Emily lowered the phone just slightly and looked at Wade. She's coming. Wade nodded and leaned back against the gas pump, arms crossed, eyes on the road. Down the dark stretch of highway, a pair of headlights appeared in the distance. Sarah's car came in fast. The headlights swept across the gas station like a flashlight cutting through a dark room. The tires crunched hard on the gravel, and the engine hadn't even fully stopped before the door swung open. Emily. Sarah's voice broke on the single word. She crossed the distance between them in a few quick strides and pulled her daughter into her arms so tight that Emily's backpack shifted sideways. She didn't say anything else for a moment. She just held on. Emily buried her face against her mother's shoulder and let out a long, shaky breath. The kind of breath that had been locked up inside her for hours, maybe longer than that. I've got you, Sarah whispered. I've got you. You're okay. She pulled back just enough to look at Emily's face. She checked her over quickly, the way mothers do, scanning for anything wrong. Her hands cupped Emily's cheeks. Are you hurt? No, Emily said. I'm okay. Sarah exhaled. She closed her eyes for just 1 second. Then she opened them, and that was when she saw Wade. She went completely still. Wade was standing several feet away, leaning against the gas pump with his arms crossed, giving them space. He wasn't looking at them directly. His eyes were on the road. Sarah stared at him. Something happened to her face that Emily didn't fully understand. The relief that had been there a moment ago didn't disappear exactly. It got tangled up with something else, something older. Her brow pulled together, and her lips parted slightly, and the color seemed to drain a little from her cheeks. Mom, Emily said. Sarah didn't answer right away. Her eyes stayed fixed on Wade. Wade turned his head slightly, sensing the attention. He met Sarah's gaze for just a moment, and then gave a short, respectful nod. Ma'am, your daughter's safe. She handled herself well. Sarah's mouth moved, but no sound came out. Wade straightened up from the pump and took a small step back, clearly prepared to leave them to it. He wasn't a man who needed credit, but Sarah took a sudden step forward. Wait, she said. Her voice was strange, thin and a little breathless. Wade stopped. Sarah was studying his face now, really studying it. The years had changed him, thickened him, turned the dark beard mostly gray and carved deep lines across his forehead and around his eyes. But the structure of the face was still there. The jaw, the eyes, the particular way he held himself, shoulders square and steady, like a man who had decided a long time ago that he wasn't going to be moved by things that tried to shake him. I know you, Sarah said quietly. Wade tilted his head slightly. Don't think we've met. We have. Sarah pressed one hand flat against her sternum, like she was trying to hold something steady inside her chest. You were younger, so was I. Her voice dropped lower. County Fair, 20 years ago. 3 boys had cornered me behind the livestock barns, and you came through on your motorcycle and you got me home. The silence that followed was the kind that has real weight to it. Wade looked at her. Something moved behind his eyes, slow and careful, like a memory rising up from deep water. That was you, he said. It wasn't a question. Sarah nodded. Her eyes were bright and glassy. Emily looked from her mother to the big biker standing in the yellow gas station light and felt the ground shift underneath the night in a way she couldn't quite put into words. Something enormous had just happened. Something that made the world feel much smaller and much more deliberate than it had any right to be. Nobody spoke for a moment. Then a sound cut through the stillness from down the road. Blue and red lights strobed in the distance. 2 sets of them, moving fast along the dark highway, slowing as they approached the bus stop several hundred yards away. Doors opening. Voices carrying on the night air. Sarah turned. Emily turned. Wade turned. The lights had stopped right where Emily had jumped off the bus. Wade was already moving toward the road before either of them spoke. Not fast, not urgent in any obvious way, just steady and deliberate, the way a man moves when he has made a decision and isn't going back on it. He had flagged the bus driver down before Sarah arrived and told him to call the police. Told him why. Short sentences. Clear facts. No drama. The driver had listened. "Stay here," Wade said over his shoulder. Sarah put her arm around Emily, and they stood together at the edge of the gas station lot, watching. Down the road, the bus sat at a crooked angle with its hazard lights blinking orange against the dark. 2 police cruisers were parked with their noses pointing in, lights still rolling. 3 officers stood near the front of the bus. A 4th was speaking into a radio by his cruiser door. Emily could see the passenger. He was standing on the gravel shoulder between 2 officers. He looked completely ordinary. That was the thing that made her stomach turn. He had his hands at his sides, and his posture was relaxed, and from this distance, he could have been anyone. A tired man waiting for a ride. A neighbor somebody knew from church. He was talking to one of the officers with what looked like a calm, patient expression. Like none of this was a big deal, like he had absolutely nothing to worry about. Emily's jaw tightened. Wade reached the edge of the scene and spoke briefly with one of the officers, a tall man with a gray mustache, who listened without interrupting. Wade pointed once toward the gas station. The officer looked in their direction and then back at Wade, and nodded. The officer with the mustache walked to the bus and stepped inside. The passenger watched him go. For just a moment, just a flicker, something changed in his expression. It was small. Most people would have missed it. But Emily had spent weeks learning to read every small thing about this man, and she didn't miss it. He was nervous. Sarah felt Emily's arm tense and pulled her slightly closer without a word. A minute passed, then another. The officer reappeared at the top of the bus steps. He was holding something. A notebook. Dark blue cover, worn at the corners, the kind you could buy at any drugstore for a couple of dollars. He carried it carefully by the edge, like he already understood it might matter. He brought it to the officer with the gray mustache and opened it flat between them. Even from a distance, Emily could see them both go still. The kind of still that means something serious has just landed in your hands. The passenger's calm expression cracked. Just slightly. His chin lifted and his eyes moved from the notebook to the officers, and back again, and the patient look he had been wearing started coming apart at the edges. One of the officers near him stepped closer. Not aggressive, just closer. The officer with the gray mustache looked up from the notebook and said something to the others, low and firm. Then he walked toward where Wade was standing. Wade listened. His face didn't change much, but his jaw set hard. He turned and walked back toward Emily and Sarah. Emily watched him come. The gas station light caught the silver in his beard, and the patches on his vest, and the deep lines of his face. She watched his eyes when he reached them, and what she saw there was not relief. It was something heavier than that. "The notebook," he said. He paused. "It has names in it, girls' names, descriptions, which buses they ride and when." He looked at Emily directly. "Your name is in there?" Emily heard her mother pull in a sharp breath. "There are other names too," Wade said quietly. "A lot of them." Nobody spoke. Emily stared down the road at the officers gathered under the strobing lights, at the notebook now sealed in a plastic evidence bag, at the man who had never technically done anything wrong standing in the gravel with his hands being secured behind his back. She had not imagined it. She had never imagined it. The officer with the gray mustache introduced himself as Sheriff Tom Henderson. He was a solid man, somewhere in his late 50s, with a calm voice and careful eyes that made Emily feel like he was actually listening. He took their statements one at a time, standing under the gas station canopy, while the hazard lights from the bus still blinked in the background. Emily went first. She told him everything, the weeks of small moments that added up to something she couldn't explain but couldn't ignore. The changed seats, the reflection in the window, the way he always seemed to end up near her without ever crossing a line she could point to. She talked for almost 15 minutes, and her voice only broke once, near the end, when she described jumping off the bus into the dark. Sheriff Henderson did not rush her. He wrote in a small notepad and nodded and asked quiet follow-up questions, and never once looked at her like she was being dramatic. When she finished, he looked at her steadily. "You did the right thing," he said. "Getting off that bus was exactly the right call." Emily nodded. She didn't quite trust her voice enough to respond. Sarah gave her statement next, standing close enough that their shoulders touched. Wade gave his last. Short and factual. He described what he saw when he pulled into the gas station, what the girl's body language told him, what he noticed about the bus, and why he flagged the driver down. He answered every question without hesitation. Henderson thanked all three of them and said a detective would be in touch by morning. The ride home was quiet. Sarah drove, and Emily sat in the passenger seat with her knees pulled up and her arms wrapped around them. The headlights cut a pale lane through the dark country roads. The fields on either side were black and flat, and the sky above them was full of stars that didn't seem to care at all about what had just happened. Emily watched them anyway. When they got home, Sarah made tea she didn't drink, and Emily changed into pajamas and climbed into bed and pulled the blanket up to her chin. The house was still, the kind of still that feels different at night after something frightening. Like the walls are thinner than usual, she lay there staring at the ceiling. Every time she closed her eyes, she was back on that bus. Back in the dark aisle with her backpack in her lap, and the windows black outside, and the rows of empty seats in front of her. She could feel the moment again when her body made the decision before her brain caught up. The doors, the gravel, the cold air. And then the bus pulling away, and the man standing up inside it. She pressed her eyes shut harder and breathed slowly until the image softened. Down the hall, Sarah sat on the edge of her bed in the dark with her phone in her hands. She hadn't opened it. She just held it, feeling its weight. She kept seeing Wade's face when he walked back across that gas station lot. Older now, weathered and lined and framed by that thick gray-streaked beard. But something underneath it still the same. The same steady eyes, the same unhurried way of moving toward a problem instead of away from it. 20 years. 2 different roads. 2 different nights that had somehow bent back toward each other and landed in the same gravel lot under the same blinking lights. She pressed her thumb against the edge of her phone and stared at the dark window across the room. On the other side of the county, Wade pulled up to his small house and cut the engine. He sat on the bike for a moment in the driveway without moving. The notebook kept coming back to him. Not his name in it. Not Emily's alone. All those other names. All those other girls with their schedules written down in careful handwriting like they were items on a list. He got off the bike slowly and went inside, but he didn't head for the bedroom. He sat down at his kitchen table and stared at the wall, and couldn't stop thinking about how many of them were still out there, not knowing. The detectives arrived at 9 in the morning. Emily heard the knock from upstairs and came down to find Sarah already opening the front door. 2 of them stood on the porch. A woman with short dark hair and sharp, attentive eyes introduced herself as Detective Reyes. The man beside her was younger, quieter, with a notepad already open in his hand. His name was Detective Carr. They were polite, professional. They wiped their shoes on the mat without being asked and accepted the offer of water and sat down at the kitchen table like they had done this 100 times before, which Emily figured they probably had. The morning light came in soft through the window above the sink. Outside, a bird was singing somewhere in the yard. It felt strange to Emily that the world looked so normal when everything inside her still felt turned upside down. Detective Reyes looked at Emily directly, not in a way that felt like pressure, more like she was making sure Emily knew she had her full attention. "Take your time," she said. "There is no rush. Start as far back as you can remember. Even the small things matter." Emily folded her hands on the table and took a breath. She started at the beginning. The first time she noticed him had been about 6 weeks ago. A Tuesday, she thought. She had been tired from a long school day and wasn't really paying attention to anything around her when she sat down. But somewhere along the route she got that feeling. The prickly kind. Like something was watching her. She looked up, and he was there across the aisle and 1 row back, just sitting, looking out the window. Perfectly normal except for the fact that something about it didn't feel normal at all. She had told herself she was being weird about it. Detective Reyes nodded and wrote something down. What did he look like? Emily described him carefully. Medium height, average build, brown jacket, hair that was thinning on top, a face that was completely forgettable in every way except that she had memorized it without meaning to. Mid-40s, maybe. The kind of person you would walk past in a grocery store and never think about again. He looked like nobody, Emily said quietly. That's the part that made it confusing. He didn't look like someone scary. He just looked like a regular person. Detective Reyes nodded again. That's helpful. Keep going. Emily kept going. She talked about the second time, and the third. The way he always boarded before her stop, but somehow always ended up nearby. The time she switched seats midway through the ride, and felt that cold wave of dread when she glanced back, and realized he had shifted too. The way he never spoke to her directly, never stared in a way she could confront. Just occupied the same space in a way that made her feel like a small animal being tracked across an open field. She talked about the Friday night when she finally got off the bus. Her voice stayed steady for most of it. It only went thin when she described watching the bus pull away and seeing him stand up inside it. She paused there for a second and pressed her lips together, and then kept going. Detective Carr was writing quickly now. When she finished, Detective Reyes leaned forward slightly. Emily, the details you just gave us are very specific. The seat patterns, the timing, the route changes. That kind of careful observation is genuinely valuable to an investigation like this. Emily blinked. She hadn't thought of it as observation. It had just been fear. Across the table, Sarah was very still. She had barely moved the entire time Emily was talking. Now she was looking at her daughter with an expression Emily had never quite seen on her face before. Not the tired look she wore after long shifts. Not the worried look she wore when bills came in. Something deeper. Something that looked a lot like pain, mixed with a kind of quiet awe. Emily had carried all of that, every single week, and she had never said a word. The detectives left just before noon. Sarah walked them to the door and stood on the porch for a moment after they drove away. The neighborhood was quiet. A neighbor was raking leaves across the street. A kid on a bicycle rolled past without looking up. Just a regular Saturday. Just a regular world that had no idea what the last 24 hours had felt like inside this house. She went back inside and found Emily curled up on the couch with a blanket pulled to her chin, already asleep. The exhaustion had finally won. Sarah stood in the doorway and watched her daughter breathe for a long moment. Then she quietly picked up her keys. She had asked around that morning. Just a few questions. The deputy who had taken her statement the night before had mentioned something in passing about Wade Mercer. Said he was a regular face at community events. Said there was a veterans outreach gathering that afternoon at Millfield Park, and that Wade usually showed up to help run it. Sarah had written down the address. It took her about 15 minutes to drive there. She almost turned back twice. Millfield Park sat on the edge of town, where the road curved toward the older neighborhoods. A gravel lot. A few picnic shelters with patched roofs. A wide open lawn that someone had clearly mowed recently because it still smelled like fresh-cut grass. When Sarah pulled in, she could already see the row of motorcycles parked along the far fence, patches of color and chrome in the afternoon sun. She stepped out of the car and looked around. Tables had been set up under the main shelter, folding chairs, a long line of food containers with steam rising from the lids. People moved around in easy, comfortable ways. Veterans in baseball caps and faded jackets sat together in small groups, laughing about something. A cluster of children chased each other near the old oak tree at the edge of the lawn. Someone had set up a face painting station near the water fountain, and a small girl was sitting very still, with her chin raised, while a young woman painted a butterfly across her cheek. It was warm, cheerful, the kind of afternoon that made you breathe a little easier without even trying. Sarah scanned the crowd. And then she found him. Wade was standing near one of the far tables. He had his leather vest on over a plain, dark shirt, the Hells Angels patches bright against the worn leather. He was holding a large tray of food and listening to an older man in an army cap who was talking with both hands moving at once. Wade wasn't saying much. He rarely did. But he was fully there, head tilted slightly, eyes steady, giving the man every bit of his attention like nothing else in the world existed right then. The older veteran laughed hard at something. Slapped the table. Wade's expression broke into a slow, quiet grin. It changed his whole face. Then a little boy of maybe 6 came charging across the grass and wrapped both arms around Wade's leg without any warning at all. Wade looked down. He set the tray carefully on the table and crouched down to the boy's level. Said something. The boy answered with enormous seriousness, nodding his small head. Wade nodded back with the same seriousness, like whatever the boy had reported was the most important information he had received all day. The boy giggled and ran back toward the oak tree. Wade watched him go. Still crouched there for just a second, that quiet grin still on his face. Sarah stood at the edge of the lawn, and felt something shift inside her chest. Something that had been clenched up tight since last night. Maybe longer than that. Slowly loosening its grip. She had spent 20 years carrying the image of a teenage boy on a motorcycle who had stepped in when no one else would. She had never been able to properly thank him. Had never even known where to begin. She took a breath, and she walked toward him. Sarah made it home just before 5 o'clock. Emily was awake by then, sitting at the kitchen table with a glass of water and her phone face down in front of her. She looked better than she had that morning. Not good, but better. The kind of better that comes from a few hours of sleep when your body simply refuses to carry the weight anymore. "You hungry?" Sarah asked, setting her keys on the counter. Emily shrugged. Maybe a little. Sarah pulled open the refrigerator and started moving things around without really seeing them. Her mind was still half at the park, still processing the afternoon. Wade shaking her hand when she thanked him. The way he had looked at the ground for a moment before saying quietly that he was glad she and Emily were okay. The steadiness in his voice. The way the veterans around him treated him like someone who had earned every bit of their respect. "Mom?" Sarah looked up. Emily was pointing at the small television on the kitchen counter. Sarah had left it on low before she left, just for background noise. Now the screen showed a news desk. A reporter in a blue blazer was speaking with her hands folded neatly in front of her. Sarah crossed the kitchen and turned up the volume. Authorities in Callaway County confirming this evening that a man taken into custody late Friday night is now under investigation following the discovery of what detectives are describing as a deeply concerning personal notebook. The reporter paused. Her expression was carefully neutral, the way reporters learn to be. The notebook, recovered during the initial stop, contained what investigators describe as detailed personal information about multiple teenage girls, including physical descriptions, school schedules, and local bus routes. Emily went very still. The suspect, a 43-year-old man whose name has not yet been officially released, was detained following a report made by a concerned witness near rural Route 9. Authorities say the investigation is ongoing and are urging any families who may have noticed similar suspicious behavior on local bus routes to contact the Callaway County Sheriff's Department. They cut to a short clip of Sheriff Tom Henderson standing outside the department building. He had his hat in his hand, and his expression was serious and steady. "We want to be very clear," Henderson said, looking directly into the camera. "This investigation is active. We are not in a position to discuss all details at this time, but we are asking the public to come forward. If your child has described feeling watched or followed on a local bus route, particularly over the last several months, please contact us. That information matters." The camera cut back to the studio. Sarah turned the volume down slowly. Emily was staring at the table. Her fingers had curled around her glass of water without her seeming to notice. "That's him," Emily said quietly. "They're talking about him." "Yes." They said multiple girls. "Yes, baby." Emily was quiet for a long moment. Outside, the neighbor's dog barked once and then stopped. The refrigerator hummed. The evening light coming through the kitchen window had turned the soft orange color it gets just before the sun drops below the tree line. "I wasn't imagining it," Emily said. Her voice was very small, but there was something solid underneath it. Something that hadn't been there before. "No," Sarah said. "You were never imagining it." Across Callaway County, the evening news played in living rooms and kitchens, and on small screens propped up on bathroom counters. Families eating dinner, parents folding laundry, older couples watching from their armchairs with the sound turned up because it was easier to hear that way, and in house after house, something happened. A mother set down her fork and looked at her daughter. A father muted the television and said quietly, "Didn't you mention something about a man on the bus a few weeks back?" A teenage girl looked up from her homework. Her face went pale. Phone calls began going out across the county, one by one, then faster. Families reaching for numbers they had never expected to dial, each carrying a story that sounded very much like Emily's. Sunday morning came in quiet and gray. A thin layer of clouds stretched across the sky like a pale sheet pulled tight. The air smelled like damp grass and coming rain. Birds called from somewhere in the tree line, but even they sounded muted. Careful. Inside the Callaway County Sheriff's Department, the phones had not stopped since the night before. Sheriff Henderson had called in extra staff first thing that morning. Detectives arrived with coffee cups and legal pads. Folding chairs were set up in the conference room. The overhead lights buzzed softly. Someone had taped a large county map to the wall and was marking bus routes with a red pen. The calls kept coming. By 9 o'clock, Henderson had a list of 11 families who wanted to speak with investigators. By 10, that number had grown to 15. By 11, it was past 20 and still climbing. He stood in the hallway outside the conference room and looked at the list on his clipboard. Each name was a family. Each family had a daughter. Each daughter had a story. He rubbed the back of his neck and walked into the next interview. The families came in one at a time. Detectives sat across small tables with notepads open and voices kept low. The questions were calm and careful. "When did you notice? How many times? Can you describe him? Did your daughter say anything at the time? Did she seem frightened?" The answers came slowly at first, then all at once. A mother from the north end of the county described how her 13-year-old had stopped taking the afternoon bus 3 weeks ago without fully explaining why. She had assumed it was a social problem at school, a friend group issue, something normal. Her daughter had started asking to be picked up every single day and had not said anything more than that she just preferred it. Sitting beside her mother in the small interview room, the girl finally said what she had been holding on to for weeks. A man who rode the same route, who always seemed to end up close to her, who watched her in a way that made her stomach feel wrong. "I didn't think anyone would believe me," she said. "He never did anything." The detective writing notes looked up. "You were right to come in." 2 rooms down, a father sat stiff and tight-jawed, while his 14-year-old daughter spoke in a voice barely above a whisper. She described the same bus line, a different afternoon, but the same man. She recognized him from the details the news report had mentioned. The patient way he sat. The quiet way he watched. She had told her older brother about it once, and he had laughed and said she was being dramatic. She had not brought it up again. "I changed the time I came home," she said. "I started staying after school so I could take a later bus. I thought if I switched times, it would stop." "Did it?" the detective asked gently. The girl shook her head. "He was on the later one, too." Her father reached over and put his hand over hers without saying a word. His jaw worked like he was trying to hold something back. In the main conference room, 2 families had arrived at the same time and ended up waiting together without knowing they had anything in common. By the time a detective came to get them, the 2 mothers had already realized they were describing the same man, the same bus route, and the same quiet, creeping fear that had settled over their daughters without any of them knowing quite how to name it. Their daughters were 15 and 14. They did not know each other. They went to different schools on opposite ends of the county. They had never ridden the same bus on the same day, but their stories were nearly identical. Same seat, Same stillness. Same careful attention that felt like being studied rather than noticed. Each girl had stayed quiet because she thought she was overreacting. Each girl had changed something about her routine, trying to make it stop. Each girl had carried the fear alone. Emily Carter had not been alone at all. Monday came faster than Emily was ready for. She had barely slept. She had stared at the ceiling of her room for most of Sunday night, listening to the quiet house settle around her while her thoughts kept spinning. By the time pale light started creeping through the gap in her curtains, she had given up on sleep entirely and just lay there waiting for morning to arrive. Getting dressed felt strange, mechanical, like her hands were doing the work while her mind stayed somewhere far away. Sarah knocked softly on the door before Emily had finished lacing her shoes. "You sure you want to go today? I can call the school." "I'm fine," Emily said. She pulled the second lace tight. "I need to go." She was not fine, but staying home felt worse somehow. Staying home meant sitting alone with everything that had happened. At least at school there would be something to focus on. She was wrong about that. The difference was obvious the moment she stepped off the car and walked toward the front entrance. Heads turned. Conversations shifted. Eyes followed her down the hallway in a way that made the back of her neck feel warm. She kept her chin up, and her backpack straps pulled tight, and told herself it was nothing. That people were just curious. That it would settle down by second period. It did not settle down. By the time she reached her locker, 2 girls from her English class had already stopped to tell her how brave she was. One of them hugged her without warning, which made Emily freeze for a second before she managed to hug back. Another girl she barely recognized came up and said her older sister had seen the news report and was really glad Emily had said something. The support felt warm. It also felt heavy, like being held under a spotlight she had not asked to stand in. By lunchtime, the whole school seemed to know her name. She sat at her usual table with her tray and tried to eat normally. Her friend Cassie sat close beside her and kept a steady stream of quiet conversation going, which helped. Cassie had texted all weekend and had not pushed for details, which Emily appreciated more than she could say. But 2 tables over, she caught pieces of a different kind of conversation. She did not mean to listen. She was not trying to. The voices just carried. "I heard she just panicked and jumped off a random bus in the middle of nowhere. My mom said they found some notebook, but it doesn't even prove anything. Like, the guy probably just rides that bus every day. Some people are just weird. It doesn't mean he was actually doing something. She probably just wanted the attention." Emily set her fork down. She stared at her tray. The mashed potatoes blurred slightly at the edges. She blinked and looked back up and kept her expression very still because she was not going to cry at a lunch table in front of the entire school. She was not. Cassie had heard it too. She turned and opened her mouth like she was going to say something sharp in Emily's direction, but Emily touched her arm. "Don't," Emily said quietly. "It's fine." "It's not fine. Please, just leave it." Cassie pressed her lips together but stayed quiet. By the end of the school day, the warm feeling from the morning had gone cold. The support was still there. She knew that. Teachers had been kind. Several students had been genuinely caring. But the other voices had gotten under her skin in a way she could not shake. They had planted something small and sharp inside her chest, and it sat there through every remaining class, through the walk to the car pickup line, through the quiet drive home with Sarah. She looked out the passenger window at the passing road and thought about what those voices had said. Panicked, overreacted, wanted attention. What if they were right? What if she had misread everything? What if the man had simply been a harmless stranger who happened to take the same bus? What if she had caused all of this for nothing? She pressed her forehead lightly against the cool glass of the window and said nothing at all. The diner was small and warm and smelled like coffee and fried onions. It sat on the edge of town between a hardware store and an empty lot, the kind of place that had probably looked exactly the same for 40 years. Red vinyl booths lined the walls. A long counter with spinning stools ran along one side. A chalkboard above the register listed the daily specials in uneven handwriting. Emily slid into the booth across from her mother and wrapped both hands around a glass of water. She had not said much on the drive over. Sarah had not pushed. Wade was already there when they arrived. He sat in the back corner booth, which Emily figured was probably not an accident. He had a clear view of the whole diner from that spot. His leather vest was over a plain, dark shirt, and his thick, gray-streaked beard caught the warm light from the lamp above the table. He looked up when they walked in and gave a single slow nod. He looked exactly as intimidating as the first time Emily had seen him on that dark roadside. She was starting to understand that the intimidating part was just the outside. They ordered. Wade got coffee and pie. Sarah got soup. Emily ordered a grilled cheese because it was the only thing that sounded manageable. For a few minutes, they talked about simple things: the weather, the diner's coffee, whether the pie was any good. Wade said it was decent. Not the best he had ever had, but decent. Then Sarah set her spoon down and looked at him steadily. "The detectives called again this afternoon," she said. "They said the case is moving forward, that the notebook is being processed, and that a few more families have come forward." Wade nodded. "I heard something similar." "Emily had a hard day at school?" Sarah said. She did not look at Emily when she said it. She just said it plainly, like a fact that deserved to be on the table. Emily looked down at her grilled cheese. "People are saying she overreacted," Sarah continued, "that she panicked over nothing. Some of the other kids are giving her a hard time." The diner hummed quietly around them. Dishes clinked somewhere in the kitchen. A couple near the front laughed at something. Wade set his coffee mug down slowly. He looked at Emily directly, and his voice was low and even. "You didn't overreact," he said. Emily met his eyes. "Some people think I did. Some people are wrong." He said it without any heat, just quietly and completely, the way a person says something they know all the way down to their bones. Emily nodded but did not answer. Wade was quiet for a moment. He turned his mug in a slow circle on the table. When he spoke again, his voice had shifted to something softer, something that carried weight. "I had a sister," he said, "younger than me by 6 years. Her name was Darlene." Neither Emily nor Sarah said anything. They just listened. "She was bright," he said. "Funny, the kind of person who remembered everybody's birthday and made you feel like the most important person in the room." He paused. "When she was about your age, someone started paying her too much attention, showing up places she was, making her feel watched." Emily's hands went still around her water glass. "She didn't say anything for a long time," Wade continued. "She thought people would think she was making it up, that they'd say she was dramatic or looking for attention." He looked at the table. "She kept it to herself until she couldn't anymore." His jaw tightened slightly, just for a second. "By the time anyone really listened," he said quietly, "it was too late to stop what happened to her." The diner noise faded into the background. Emily felt something press hard against the inside of her chest. "I couldn't protect her," Wade said. "I've carried that every single day since." He looked up at Emily. "So, when I saw you on that road, alone and scared in the dark, there was never a question in my mind about whether to stop. The community center on Birch Street had not been this full in years. Folding chairs filled every row. People stood along the walls with their arms crossed and their faces tight. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting everything in a flat, white glow. Someone had set up a small podium at the front of the room, near a folding table, where Sheriff Tom Henderson sat with 2 detectives and a woman from the county prosecutor's office. Emily sat beside Sarah near the middle of the room. She had not wanted to come. Sarah had said it was important. Wade sat 3 rows behind them, alone. A few people had glanced at him when he walked in. Some had looked away quickly. Others had stared a little too long. He did not seem to notice. Or maybe he just did not let on. Sheriff Henderson opened the meeting with a short statement. He thanked people for coming. He said the investigation was active. He asked the community to be patient and to encourage anyone with relevant information to come forward. That was when things got complicated. A man near the front raised his hand before Henderson had even finished. He was heavy-set, with a red face, and a voice that filled the room without any effort. "My nephew works with Daniel Reeves," the man said. "Known him for years. Good worker. Quiet. Minds his own business. Nobody who knows him believes any of this." A few people nodded. A few others shifted uncomfortably. A woman on the other side of the room spoke up next. "My daughter goes to school with Emily Carter. She said the whole thing started because a man sat on the same bus a few times. That's it. That's the whole story." Emily stared straight ahead. Her hands were folded in her lap, and she pressed them together hard. Sarah put a hand on her knee. "The notebook had real names in it," someone said from the back. "Real schedules." "Notebooks aren't crimes," the first man shot back. Voices rose. Henderson raised a hand for quiet. He got it, but barely. A father near the aisle stood up. His voice cracked slightly when he spoke. "My daughter came forward this week. She is 14 years old and she has barely slept since Friday. If one girl on a bus had not trusted herself, my daughter might never have told us what she experienced." He paused. That matters. More voices, more disagreement. The room tilted back and forth like a boat in choppy water. Emily's eyes were wet. She blinked hard and looked at the ceiling. Then a chair scraped the floor somewhere behind her. Wade stood up. The room got quieter. Not completely, but quieter. People turned to look at him, some with curiosity, some with suspicion. A man near the wall muttered something under his breath. Wade did not rush. He stood still for a moment, big and steady in the buzzing light. And then he spoke. "I'm not a lawyer," he said. His voice was calm and low, and carried clearly across the room. "I'm not a detective. I don't know how the law works or how the case gets built. That's not why I'm standing up." He paused. "I'm standing up because I was there Friday night. And what I saw was a 15-year-old girl standing alone in the dark on the side of a rural road, terrified out of her mind. Not performing. Not looking for attention. Afraid. The real kind." The muttering in the room went still. "Fear like that doesn't come from nowhere," Wade said. "It builds up over weeks because someone has been making you feel unsafe, and nobody around you has noticed." He looked slowly around the room. That girl had been noticing something wrong for a long time. She kept it to herself because she was worried nobody would believe her. He let that sit for just a moment. "The least any of us can do," he said quietly, "is make sure that the next time a young person says they are afraid, we stop what we're doing and we listen." The room was silent. Then, slowly, the father near the aisle began to clap. Wednesday morning arrived gray and cool. Emily sat at the kitchen table with both hands wrapped around a mug of hot chocolate. She had not gone to school. Sarah had called the front office the night before and explained that Emily needed one more day. Nobody argued. The television in the living room was on low. A local news anchor was talking about the investigation again. Emily could hear the words from where she sat, but she did not get up to watch. She had heard enough news for a while. Sarah came in from the hallway pulling her hair back. She was dressed for work, but her shift did not start for another 2 hours. She poured herself a coffee and sat across from Emily without saying anything right away. That was something Emily had always loved about her mother. Sarah knew when to sit quietly. "Detectives called this morning," Sarah said finally. "Early, before you woke up." Emily looked up. "They said more families came forward last night after the meeting." Sarah curled both hands around her mug. "3 more girls gave statements." Emily set her hot chocolate down. "3 more?" Sarah nodded slowly. Emily looked at the table. She thought about 3 other girls who had been carrying something heavy and silent, the same way she had. She thought about how long they might have been carrying it. "Did they say anything else?" Emily asked. "They said the statements are consistent, same patterns, same kind of thing you described." Sarah paused. "They said your account is helping them connect everything together." Emily did not say anything for a moment. Then she said, "I almost didn't say anything at all." Sarah reached across the table and covered Emily's hand with her own. "But you did." Around 10 o'clock, Wade's truck pulled up to the curb outside. He had called Sarah earlier and asked if they needed anything. Sarah had said she would not turn down company, so he had brought a paper bag from the bakery on Route 9 and a cardboard tray with 3 coffees and 1 hot chocolate, because Sarah had mentioned Emily liked it. He knocked twice and waited. Sarah opened the door and smiled. A real one, the kind that reached her eyes. "You didn't have to do that," she said, nodding toward the bag. "I know," Wade said simply. They sat around the kitchen table together. Wade did not talk about the investigation much. He asked Emily about school in general, what subjects she liked, whether she had any plans for the summer. Normal questions, easy ones, the kind that did not require her to relive anything difficult. Emily answered quietly at first, but Wade listened the way he always did, fully, without checking his phone or glancing at the clock, like whatever she said was the most important thing happening anywhere in the world right then. Somewhere in the middle of talking about how much she liked her English class, Emily realized she was actually talking, not carefully choosing every word, not bracing herself for doubt or dismissal. Just talking. It felt different. It felt lighter. Sarah watched the 2 of them from across the table and felt something loosen in her chest, something that had been pulled tight all week. After the bakery bag was mostly empty and the coffees were long gone, Sarah and Wade stayed at the table while Emily went to the living room to read. They talked quietly about the town meeting, about the way the room had shifted when Wade stood up, about the investigation slowly finding its footing. "You changed something in that room last night," Sarah said. Wade shook his head a little. "People just needed a second to breathe." "No," Sarah said gently but firmly. "You gave them a reason to." Wade looked at his coffee cup. A small smile crossed his face. Brief and quiet, the way most things about him were. Outside, the gray morning had softened. A thin band of pale sunlight pressed through the clouds and stretched across the kitchen floor. Emily turned a page in her book and did not look up, but the corners of her mouth lifted just slightly. Hope had a way of arriving quietly like that. Thursday afternoon came with real sunlight, the kind that actually felt warm when it landed on your shoulders. Emily stood on the front porch and tilted her face toward it for a moment before heading inside. Sarah had told her that morning that Detective Rivera had called again. The case was moving forward. Charges were looking likely. The district attorney's office had reviewed everything and was confident. Emily had nodded when Sarah told her. She had not jumped up or cheered. She had just nodded and said, "Okay," and gone to brush her teeth. But something inside her had settled. Like a door that had been banging in the wind all week had finally been pulled shut and latched. The gathering was held at the Millfield Community Church on Orchard Street. Not a meeting exactly. More like families finding each other in the same room and realizing they did not have to stand alone anymore. Sarah drove them over at 3 o'clock. The parking lot was already half full when they arrived. Emily recognized a few faces from school. Parents she had seen at events over the years. Some people she did not know at all, but who smiled at her when she walked through the door like they knew exactly who she was. Inside, folding tables were covered with food somebody had brought. Casseroles and sweet tea, and a plate of brownies that was already half gone. Children ran between the chairs. A few older men stood near the windows talking quietly with their hands in their pockets. Detective Rivera was there in plain clothes. She spotted Emily quickly and came over with a warm handshake and a steady look that communicated more than words could. "You doing all right?" she asked. "Yeah," Emily said, and she meant it. A woman named Mrs. Garland found Sarah near the food table, and the two of them started talking in hushed, grateful voices. Emily drifted a little on her own, and ended up near the back corner where a group of girls her age were sitting together on folding chairs. She recognized one of them, Haley Marsh. They had been in the same science class 2 years ago. Haley looked up and saw Emily standing there. She scooted her chair over without being asked. Emily sat down. For a few minutes they talked about small things. How weird the past week had been. How strange it felt to see your town on the local news. Haley said she had stopped watching after the second night because it made her stomach hurt. Emily said she understood that completely. Then Haley laughed a little at something one of the other girls said, and Emily laughed too. A real laugh. Not polite, not forced. The kind that comes up fast and honest before you have time to think about it. It surprised her. She had not laughed like that in a while. Not since before any of this started. Not since before the bus rides had started feeling heavy and wrong. The sound of it felt almost strange in her own throat. But good. Really good. The girls talked for a long time. About school and summer plans, and a movie that had just come out that two of them had already seen twice. Emily had not seen it, but she wanted to. Haley said they should all go together next weekend. She said it like it was the simplest and most obvious thing in the world. Emily looked at her and said, "Yeah, that sounds really good, actually." She meant that too. From across the room, Sarah glanced over and saw her daughter sitting in that circle of girls, talking and smiling and just being 15 for a minute. Just being a kid with no weight on her shoulders and nowhere frightening to look back at. Sarah pressed her lips together and looked away quickly before her eyes could get too full. Emily did not notice. She was busy making plans for the weekend like any other girl her age would do. Like someone who had a future she was allowed to look forward to. And for the first time in a long time, that was exactly how it felt. Friday morning started quiet. Emily slept in later than usual. The sunlight came through her curtains in long yellow strips and landed across her bedroom floor. She lay there for a while, just staring at the ceiling, and feeling the strange, unfamiliar lightness that had followed her home from the church gathering the night before. She could hear Sarah moving around downstairs. The sound of a cabinet closing, the coffee maker running. Normal sounds. Good sounds. Emily pulled her blanket up around her shoulders and closed her eyes again for a few minutes. She was not afraid of falling back asleep. She was not afraid of being alone in a quiet house. She was just resting. Just breathing. Just being. It was the first Friday morning in a long time that had felt like that. Sarah was reading something on her phone at the kitchen table when Emily came downstairs. 2 mugs were already on the counter. Sarah had made hot chocolate without being asked because she knew Emily still preferred it to coffee on weekend mornings. Emily sat down across from her and wrapped both hands around the warm mug. "How did you sleep?" Sarah asked. "Good," Emily said. "Really good, actually." Sarah smiled and went back to her phone. Emily reached over and grabbed a piece of toast from the plate between them. For a while, neither of them said anything. The house was calm. Outside the kitchen window, a bird landed on the fence post and then flew away. A car passed slowly on the street. Emily was thinking about the movie she and Haley were planning to see. She was thinking about what she wanted to wear. Ordinary thoughts. Wonderful, ordinary thoughts. Then Sarah's phone rang. It was Detective Rivera. Sarah answered quickly and moved to the far end of the kitchen. Emily watched her mother's face shift, just slightly at first. A small tightening around the eyes. Then more. Sarah said very little during the call. She said yes a few times. She said, "I see," once in a voice that was careful and controlled. She said, "Thank you for letting us know," at the end, and then set the phone down on the counter and stood with her back to Emily for a moment. Emily put down her toast. "Mom?" Sarah turned around. Her expression was not panicked, but it was not the calm face of a moment ago either. It was the face of someone choosing their words carefully because the words mattered. "The prosecutors found a problem," she said, "with some of the evidence." Emily went still. What kind of problem? Sarah sat back down. She folded her hands on the table in the way she always did when she needed to say something difficult without falling apart while saying it. She explained it the best she could. The notebook had been found during a search. But the lawyers reviewing the case had identified a question about how that search was conducted. There was an argument forming about whether the proper steps had been followed. If a judge agreed that something had gone wrong in the process, parts of the evidence could be excluded from the trial entirely. Emily stared at her. "Excluded means they can't use it?" "It means they might not be able to," Sarah said. "Nothing is decided yet, but it is serious." Emily sat very still for a long moment. The warm mug was still in her hands, but she could not feel it anymore. By Friday afternoon, word had spread. Nobody was quite sure how it happened that fast. Small towns had a way of moving information without anyone choosing to move it. By the time school let out and families were sitting down to early dinners, people all across Millfield were talking about the same thing. The notebook. The search. The possibility that the strongest piece of evidence in the whole case might be taken off the table entirely. At the diner on Main Street, a woman set down her coffee cup and said to the person across from her, "So he could just walk away from all of this?" Nobody at the table had a good answer for that. Friday evening settled over the Carter house like a heavy blanket. The sun went down early and the sky outside turned a deep gray that felt less like dusk and more like the world simply giving up on the day. Emily sat on the couch with her knees pulled up to her chest and her arms wrapped around them. The television was on, but the sound was muted. Neither of them had turned it off. Neither of them had really noticed it was still there. Sarah sat beside her with a cup of tea, going cold in her hands. "It's my fault," Emily said quietly. Sarah turned to look at her. Emily. "No, listen." Emily's voice was low and tight. "I waited too long. I should have said something the first week. I should have told you the first time he made me uncomfortable. If I had done that, maybe the police would have had more time to do things the right way. Maybe none of this would be a problem right now." "That is not true." "How do you know?" Emily asked. She looked at her mother and her eyes were red, but she was not crying yet. She was past the kind of sad that comes with tears. She had moved into the kind that just sits in your chest like a stone. "I kept telling myself I was imagining it. I kept thinking nobody would believe me. I kept waiting, and now those other girls might not get justice because I was too scared to say something sooner." Sarah set her cup down on the coffee table. She shifted on the couch so her body was fully turned toward her daughter. "You were 15 years old and you were afraid," she said. "That is not a failure. That is just being human." "But those girls," Emily said, and her voice finally cracked. "They came forward because of me. They trusted that this was going to matter, and now it might just fall apart. What do I tell them? What do I say to them?" Sarah reached over and put her hand on Emily's arm. Emily did not pull away. She leaned her head back against the couch cushion and stared up at the ceiling. "You did not create this situation," Sarah said firmly. "That man did. Every choice that led to this was his, not yours." Emily closed her eyes. A single tear slipped sideways toward her temple. "I just wanted it to be over," she whispered. "I know, baby," Sarah said. "I know." Sarah pulled her daughter close, and Emily let her. She pressed her face into her mother's shoulder the way she used to when she was very small. Sarah held her tight and did not say anything else for a while. Sometimes words just ran out. Sometimes the only thing left to offer was the simple, solid fact of being there. Outside, a truck rumbled slowly down the street, and its headlights swept across the living room wall and then disappeared. Across town, Wade Mercer sat alone at his kitchen table. The overhead light was on, but the rest of the house was dark. A glass of water sat in front of him untouched. His phone lay face down beside it. He had not looked at it in over an hour. He was thinking about his sister. Her name had been Joanna. She had been 17 when the world stopped protecting her. She had tried to tell people something was wrong. She had used exactly the words a scared teenager uses, which are never quite loud enough and never quite certain enough for the people around them to take seriously. And one by one, the people in her life had found reasons to wait, to watch, to see how things developed. By the time anyone truly listened, it was too late. Wade had carried that with him every day since. The weight of it had shaped him into the kind of man who stopped when others kept walking. The kind of man who stayed when it would have been easier to leave. He had stayed for Emily. And now he sat alone in his quiet kitchen, wondering if staying had been enough. Saturday morning came in cold and pale. The kind of morning where the sky stays white instead of blue, and the air smells like wet leaves and something close to winter. Fog clung low to the ground along the county roads and sat thick between the trees. In a small yellow house on the east side of town, a 16-year-old girl named Madison Pruitt sat cross-legged on her bedroom floor with her laptop open in front of her and a blanket pulled around her shoulders. She had not slept well. She had not slept well in several nights. Not since her parents had driven her to the sheriff's department, and she had told a detective about the man she kept seeing on the Route 7 bus. The man with the patient eyes and the quiet way of sitting very still. The man who had memorized her schedule before she even realized someone was paying that kind of attention. After she gave her statement, the detective had been kind. He had told her she did the right thing. He had thanked her and given her mother a card with a number to call. But then Friday came with its terrible news about the evidence problem. Her mother had explained it carefully, using calm words that could not disguise what they meant. There was a chance the case might not hold together the way they had hoped. There was a chance the man might not face what he deserved to face. Madison had gone to her room and stayed there. Now she sat on the floor in the early morning quiet and stared at her laptop screen. She was not sure what had made her open her old social media accounts. Some restless feeling. Some pull she could not quite explain. Maybe the same instinct that had made Emily Carter jump off a bus on a dark Friday night. She started scrolling. She was looking back through months of posts and comments and messages without knowing exactly what she was looking for. She pulled up her direct messages first. Most of them were from friends, school stuff, jokes, the usual back and forth of being a teenager. She scrolled past all of it. Then she stopped. There was a message chain from about 4 months ago, a username she did not recognize. The account had sent her 2 messages asking about her school schedule and whether she rode public transit. She remembered seeing them at the time and thinking they were spam. She had not replied. She had not deleted them either. She had just ignored them the way you ignore something that makes you briefly uncomfortable before the rest of life moves back in and fills the space. Her hands went still on the keyboard. She looked at the username again. She looked at the timing of the messages. She looked at the profile picture, which was a blank gray circle, and the account which had been created just days before those messages were sent. Her heart started beating faster. She took a screenshot, then another. She captured everything she could find. The messages, the account details, the timestamps. Her fingers moved quickly now, with a focus that surprised her. She went to a second platform, then a third. She searched the same username variations. On the third platform, she found a dormant account with 2 photographs attached to it that had never been deleted. She sat very still for a moment. Then she called her mother into the room. Her mother stood in the doorway in her bathrobe with a coffee cup in her hand. She looked at the screen. She looked at Madison. Then she set the coffee cup down on the dresser and picked up her phone and called the detective's number from the card he had given them. By mid-morning, investigators were at the Pruitt house. By early afternoon, they had connected the social media accounts to additional digital records that had not been part of the original evidence collection. Records that pointed outward in several directions. Records that filled in gaps that the legal problem had left open. The detective handling the case stood in the hallway outside Madison's room and spoke quietly into his phone. "We've got something," he said. "Tell the prosecutor we need to talk today." Saturday afternoon moved fast. Detective Ray Cobble sat at a folding table inside the small conference room at the county sheriff's department. The room smelled like old coffee and printer ink. Fluorescent lights buzzed softly overhead. On the table in front of him were printed screenshots, open laptops, 3 manila folders, and 2 empty paper cups. Across from him sat his partner, Detective Lena Shaw. She had her reading glasses on and was scrolling through records on her screen with the kind of focused quiet that meant she was close to something. "Run the username through the secondary database again," Ray said. Lena typed without looking up. "Already did. 3 hits this time." Ray leaned forward. 3 separate accounts, different platforms, same creation pattern, all made within a 2-week window. She turned the screen toward him. "And look at the timestamps on the messages." Ray studied the screen. His jaw tightened. The messages followed a pattern. Each account had targeted a different girl, Each account had asked similar questions. Schedule questions. Route questions. The kind of questions that sounded almost innocent on their own, but together painted something very clear and very ugly. Cross-reference with the notebook entries, Ray said. Lena pulled up a scanned copy of the notebook. The same notebook that had been discovered on the night Emily Carter stood trembling on a dark roadside, while a biker named Wade Mercer kept quiet watch beside her. Lena moved slowly through the pages, and then stopped. Page 11, she said. Ray looked. A name, a bus route number, a physical description, a notation about a social media platform. The same platform where Madison Pruitt had found the messages that morning. Ray sat back in his chair. He pressed his palms flat against the table for a moment. Get the digital forensics team on the phone. And call the prosecutor. Already texting her, Lena said. By 3 o'clock that afternoon, the prosecutor, a sharp and careful woman named Janet Flores, was sitting in the same conference room reviewing everything with both detectives. She read through the screenshots. She reviewed the account records. She traced the timeline with a pen, marking points where the digital evidence intersected with what investigators had already gathered. She asked questions. Good ones. Hard ones. Ray and Lena answered each one steadily. After about 40 minutes, Janet set her pen down and folded her hands on the table. This fills the gap, she said. Her voice was calm, but there was something underneath it. Relief, maybe. Or the particular kind of quiet satisfaction that comes from watching broken pieces finally fit together. Enough to move forward? Ray asked. More than enough. Janet opened her folder and looked at the charge sheet that had already been drafted. We are not just moving forward. We are adding to this. She picked up her pen again. The digital evidence connects him to at least 4 additional victims beyond Emily Carter. That changes the scope of what we are filing. Ray nodded slowly. I am calling the judge this afternoon, Janet continued. We will have this locked in before the weekend is over. The calls went out before dinner. Detective Cobble called each family personally. He did not leave messages. He waited until someone answered, and then he spoke plainly and carefully, so there was no room for misunderstanding. When he called Sarah Carter, Emily was sitting at the kitchen table doing homework. Sarah answered the phone and listened. After a moment, her hand came up and covered her mouth. Her eyes filled. Emily looked up from her textbook. Mom? Sarah held up one finger. She was still listening. Then she said, Thank you. Thank you so much. And ended the call. She set the phone down on the counter. She turned toward Emily, and for a moment she did not say anything. She just looked at her daughter. Her face was full and open, and something heavy had clearly left it. They are filing more charges, Sarah said. The case is stronger now than it has ever been. Emily stared at her. It's real, Sarah said softly. It's really happening. Several weeks passed. The legal proceedings moved forward steadily. Charges were filed. A court date was set. The community slowly exhaled. Life did not return to exactly what it had been before. It rarely does after something like that. But it moved forward. That was enough. Emily went back to school. She rode the bus again. The first morning she did, her hands were a little shaky, and she chose a seat near the front, close to the driver. But she did it. She looked out the window at the familiar roads and the bare November trees, and she breathed. Each day after that got a little easier. Sarah picked up an extra shift at work. Not because she had to, because she finally felt steady enough to think about something other than fear. Wade went back to his quiet routines: charity rides, veteran events, long roads and early mornings. But things between the three of them had changed in a way that could not be undone. Some connections form fast and hold forever. The community safety event was held on a Saturday afternoon in early December. The high school gymnasium had been decorated simply. Folding chairs were set up in rows facing a small stage. Handmade banners hung from the rafters. A long table near the back wall held casseroles and paper plates and a sheet cake that someone had decorated with the words "Stronger Together" in blue frosting. Families filled the seats, parents and children and grandparents. Some of the same faces that had argued fiercely at the town meeting weeks earlier now sat quietly and respectfully. People had changed. Not all of them, but enough. Emily sat in the third row with her mother beside her. She wore a dark green sweater and her hair was pulled back. She looked calm. More than calm. She looked like herself again. Wade sat near the back. He had arrived late and slipped into a seat along the wall, like he was hoping nobody would notice him. He wore a clean flannel shirt and his leather vest over it, the Hells Angels patches visible and unapologetic. His thick, gray-streaked beard was neatly kept. He held his helmet in his lap and looked straight ahead. A few people glanced at him when he came in, but this time the glances were different. No narrowed eyes, no whispers. A few people gave him a small nod. One older man reached over and shook his hand without saying a word. Wade accepted it without making a big deal of it. Sheriff Tom Henderson took the stage just after 2 o'clock. He was a tall man with a steady voice and a calm authority that made a room quiet down without him having to ask. He thanked the families. He thanked the investigators. He talked about courage in plain, honest terms, not the dramatic kind from movies. The real kind. The quiet kind. The kind that lives inside a 15-year-old girl who trusts her instincts, even when everyone around her might not believe her. Emily looked at her hands when he said that part. Then Henderson reached under the podium and picked up a wooden plaque. "There is one more person I want to recognize," he said. "And I am going to ask him to come up here, even though I already know he would rather I didn't." A few people laughed softly. "Wade Mercer," Henderson said. "Would you come up here, please?" The room turned. Wade did not move for a moment. He looked at the floor. Then he took a slow breath, set his helmet on the empty chair beside him, and stood up. He walked to the front of the room with the unhurried ease of a man who had been through harder things than a room full of people watching him. But his jaw was tight, and his eyes were careful. Henderson shook his hand firmly. He held out the plaque. Then he turned to face the room and said simply, "This man saw something wrong, and he did not look away." The room rose, every single chair emptied. The applause was not polite. It was full and genuine, and it filled that gymnasium from the folding chairs all the way up to the rafters. Wade stood at the front of the room holding the plaque with both hands. His head dropped slightly. His shoulders, broad as they were, seemed to carry something lighter for just a moment. He was not a man who cried easily, but his eyes were bright. Afterward, as people moved toward the food table and the noise of conversation filled the room, Emily and Sarah made their way through the crowd toward Wade. He was standing near the side door, plaque tucked under one arm, talking quietly with Sheriff Henderson. Henderson gave Emily a warm nod when they approached. Then he excused himself and moved away, giving them space. The three of them stood together for a moment. The gym noise hummed around them, but right there it felt quieter somehow. Sarah looked at Wade. She had thought about this moment more times than she could count. For 20 years, she had carried the face of a teenage biker who stepped in when no one else did. She had wondered who he was, whether he ever thought about that night, whether he even remembered it. Now he was standing right in front of her. "I have been trying to figure out what to say to you for a long time," she said. Her voice was steady, but her eyes were full. 20 years is a long time to carry a thank you. Wade looked at her quietly. "You saved me," Sarah said. "Back then, you didn't have to. You didn't know me. But you stopped." She pressed her lips together for just a second. "Thank you for saving me." Wade held her gaze. He gave one slow nod. Then Emily stepped forward. She was not as tall as her mother. She had to look up at him a little, but she did not hesitate. "And thank you for saving me too," she said. Wade looked at the girl standing in front of him. The same quiet courage in her eyes that he had seen that dark Friday night on the roadside. He had recognized something in her from the very first moment. He understood now why. He looked at them both. Mother and daughter. 2 separate nights. 2 separate decades. The same man standing between them and something terrible. He cleared his throat softly. "Looks like I was exactly where I needed to be," he said. It was a simple thing to say, but it was the truest thing he knew. They walked with him outside into the cold December afternoon. The sky was pale and clear. The parking lot was half empty now, quiet except for the sound of gravel under boots and the distant hum of highway traffic. Wade's motorcycle sat near the edge of the lot. A big machine, dark and low, with a single bedroll strapped behind the seat. He pulled on his jacket, buckled his helmet, swung one leg over the seat with the easy movement of a man who had done it 10,000 times. He looked back at them once. Neither Emily nor Sarah said anything more. Some moments do not need more words. Wade turned the engine over. It rumbled up through the cold air, deep and steady. He pulled slowly out of the lot and onto the road. They watched him go. The sound of the engine stretched out, and then gradually softened as he moved further down the long, straight road. The pale winter sun sat low on the horizon ahead of him, and his silhouette grew smaller and smaller until the road bent, and he was gone. Sarah put her arm around Emily's shoulders. Emily leaned into her mother. They stood there together in the cold, both thinking the same thing without needing to say it out loud. A stranger the world had feared, a man who looked nothing like anyone's idea of a hero. And yet he had shown up twice across 20 years, in the right place at the right moment, and quietly made sure they were safe. Some people call that coincidence. Sarah and Emily knew better. I hope you like this story. Please share what's your favorite part of the story, and where in the world you are watching from. Have a wonderful day.